place to be is living free in Tennessee.
Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, March 3rd, 2025, and this is episode 1012 of Living Free in Tennessee. And I'm in like the 4-digit numbers now, so that just feels weird every time still because I'm so new to the 4 digits. Today, we are going to talk about milk kefir, its origins, its benefits, how to make it, how to use it. We're also going to have Tales from the Prepper Pantry and Operation Independence. I do not have a frugality tip this week. And Margot's the one who's been sending them all the time. So Margot, send me another one. Or if you have a frugality tip you want to send it to Nicole at livingfreeintennessee.com. We also haven't heard from Joe on a shopping report since January 19th. So Joe, are you doing okay? Are you okay? Have prices just gone nuts? I'm kind of missing the shopping reports, and I think other people are too. So I don't know. If there's a better way for you to get them to me than Discord, let me know about that. So the deep dive into kefir is the main body of today's show. And this Monday has been the Monday of Mondays for 2025 for me. So as you can see, I'm like in 90 layers here and my ski jacket, so that I can be warm because I let the fire go out because it's going to be warm today. And now it's not warm yet. We'll just put it that way. So I was foiled by the weather forecast, and that's okay. I can light a fire, but then I didn't want to light a fire right before the show and not be like, then I need to pay attention to the fire, right? So, but pretty much everything I've started today has taken between 3 and 10 extra steps to do. And I decided to just embrace the fact that Monday is Mondaying and go with what I can get done one at a time. Luckily, I had my 3 things form all filled out. So I've actually gotten a remarkable number of things done. Joe Salatin talks about having a chalkboard with 20-minute projects on it on his farm, so that if you've just done something like I ran a length of fence and it was supposed to take 4 hours and it took me 3 and lunch is in half an hour, I've got 20 minutes. What do I do? When you have this like list of things you can do in 20 minutes, it really helps you do that. If you took the webinar we did with him on time management for the homestead, that was something he talked about as part of that. And it's a really cool tip that we've adopted here. I love that tip. Speaking of Joel, we'll be interviewing him in April. Anyway, spoiler alert. I just found that out before the show too. So some things are going great today. But because I had a similar list of just household thing, I was actually able to get some other clerical stuff done just in that tweener time because I kept running into barriers. So anyway, if I sound a little scattered today, that's why, but we've got a really great show all about kefir, milk kefir, not water kefir. I've actually never made water kefir, but I'm sure I'll jump into that as well. Before we jump into that part though, I do want to talk to you about the first sponsor of today's show, which is Permies.com. And Permies.com has a bundle out. I was talking about this last week, and I told you don't buy the bundle till Saturday. And now I get to show you why. See, there's my nice spreadsheet. That is not even what I was supposed to be sharing. But I hope you enjoy that. I told you, like, things have been a little weird today. So all I want to do is oh, it's so weird. When I click on one thing, it clicks on something else. And I did restart my computer. Anyway, it's the bundle over at Permies.com, which is a bundle of fungi-related resources at a seriously low price. So they dropped the price to $45 for this. And I got to see some of this stuff in the making. You see a picture of Bo right there on the screen, who did a bunch of research on how to use mycelium insulate, or how to make mycelium insulation. And they were making it when I was at Wheaton Labs. So that's kind of cool. So you've got some webinars, you've got video about the insulation he made, making a wooden door insulation with mycelium in there, and all sorts of really cool stuff about mushrooms, basically, all in one cool, fun fungi bundle called a fundle. $45 at Permies.com. You can grab that link in the show notes. Our second sponsor of today's show is Agorist Tax Advice. That's over at agoristaxadvice.com/LFTN if you want to sign up for a really cool e-newsletter that's free. But Agorist Tax Advice, Matthew Sursley works with you to analyze where you're spending your dollars how your funds are being tracked, where they're going. So you got to give him that information in order for this to work. And then he helps you structure yourself so you can take advantage of the tax code and get the optimal tax write-offage that you can, so they keep more of your money in your pocket. Find out more about that at agristaxadvice.com/LFTN to sign up for his newsletter. With that, it's time for our first segment of today's show, and that's Tales from the Prepper Pantry, where we talk about, this is an astounding thing we do, storing what you use and using what you store. And it's something that has developed here on Holler Homestead over the last 18 years. As I realized how far the grocery stores were from, like when I first moved out here, guys, I thought I'd never see anybody ever again. And then like day 2, my neighbor comes walking up and introduces himself and ends up becoming a really good friend. So that was cool. But the closest store is 25 minutes away. The closest decent store is 35 minutes away. And that's not that long, except for when you think about like running out to the grocery store for 5 minutes to get one thing. 5 minutes turns into over an hour really quickly, and it's a huge waste of time. So what naturally happened when I moved out here is I went to the grocery store less. I actually think I drive less now than when I lived in a city where you could just drive to places really quickly and get things done. Well, as I got further down my journey of homesteading and into more pantry management and preserving food in season and then using that out of season and all of the things we've developed here at the Holler Homestead, I developed a method of tracking what I use and using what I track, so to speak. I realized that it's really easy when you first start planning your pantry to just store a bunch of things you think you should have. And if you change your mindset, slow your roll, and make a list of what you use every month, and then start building that up over time, you can end up having a pantry that turns into a savings account. And that's why this segment even exists, because I would just be talking about, what we were doing with the pantry and the Prepper Pantry. And it got named the Prepper Pantry because when I finally had enough space for my pantry, rather than tucking stuff all over the house, it was very excited to have a dedicated place for it. And then somebody went in there and they're like, that looks like the Prepper Pantry. And I'm like, well, it is a Prepper Pantry, but it's really just a bunch of stuff we use. So this weekend, I had a choir concert. We sang Haydn's Creation and a couple other pieces. It was an amazing concert with that orchestra, and we performed well, and the soloists were awesome. And I was almost in tears at the end of it because it was just a very powerful emotional experience from the stage. I don't know how it was in the audience. Well, I mean, I know it was good from the audience because we heard from audience members, but that meant that we had a very long dress rehearsal on Saturday in the afternoon, and we had a performance Sunday in the afternoon, which gave me only, like, usually on the weekends, I actually work a 6 to 8 hour day for one of the things I do, whether it's the homestead, the coffee, or whatever. And I didn't have that this weekend. And so I was really like, okay, what can I do that really moves the ball forward in the pantry or around the home or something? And I decided it was time to smoke the bacon before it gets warm, because there's been bacon curing in my fridge and we had cold nights. So I was smoking the bacon. And then once you smoke the bacon, you have to slice the bacon. And I missed one package of bacon in my freezer. So that's just going to be saved until the fall, I guess. But all of the bacon smoked except for 2, which I'll do tonight after choir when it's cold. And I ended up with a good 30 pounds of bacon that I needed to slice. So pretty much this whole weekend was dedicated to Operation Put Meat in the Freezer, from getting the lamb processed into smaller pieces to grind, to getting the bacon ready to slice, which requires me to pre-freeze it because it slices much cleaner if it's frozen. So that's what I did. I got my big old meat slicer out. And then while the meat slicer was out, because I'm a deli slicer, I was like, well, we're having charcuterie this week anyway, so I'll slice those with the slicer rather than my knife, which I usually use my knife for little bits because it's not worth cleaning the thing. But I was like, I'll do that, and then I'll do the bacon, and then I'll clean it, and I'll put it away, and it'll be perfect, except that my freezer's like Sunday. So I got the bacon all prepared on Saturday to get ready to slice, but I didn't put it in the freezer because I didn't want it to be too frozen. So I was like, I'll get up Sunday, put it in the freezer, and in an hour it should be ready. Nope. Okay, in 2 hours it should be ready. Half of it was ready in 2 hours. 3 hours, still not ready. Finally, I gave up. And I still have 2 pieces of bacon that I need to slice that are now frozen solid. So now I have to do the opposite, which is let them thaw out a little bit before I can slice them with the meat slicer. But I got all of the bacon sliced for the spring workshop and packaged. The bacon we eat personally, I put in smaller packages, and I ran out of parchment paper, which it just occurred to me I need to get parchment paper while I'm in town today so that I can have those in nice little like long tubes that I put in the freezer. But I spent a good 6 hours this weekend between Saturday and Sunday getting the lamb processed and ready for the freezer and getting the bacon ready. So there's an investment of time, even though it's kind of a frugality tip that you can process your own bacon and stuff from the pigs that you raise, and it saves you a bunch of money, but it does not save you time if you're doing it the way I do. So really, I've been slicing like a mad woman, and I'm stoked that is almost behind me. And the ground lamb will happen next. It is now frozen and it needs to come out for an hour before I can run it through the grinder. And the way I usually do that is, because I have it sort of flat on cookie sheets in cubes, is I take it out and I let it start defrosting and I pull off the edges and grind as it gets to just like the perfect amount of frozenness. I would like to get my hands on a commercial grinder, and I was actually emailing somebody about buying one from her, but I haven't closed that loop. So maybe I'll close that loop so that I can hopefully maybe just grind it frozen. I don't know. Has anybody used in the comments? Have you used a commercial grinder? Can you just like freeze that stuff solid and go? Because that's the thing I always run into, is you're supposed to like get the meat to this 3/4 frozen place. And if you are on a schedule, it does not necessarily happen on a schedule. So you kind of have to do that on one of those days where you're like, I'm doing free time, where I'm also doing other things, but every so often I'll check the thing. And then when the thing is perfect, then I do it. Or you just don't do it. You just don't do it when it's perfect. I did do a test with the Scotch eggs that I made, the carnivore Scotch eggs. And I froze a couple of them, and I let one defrost for 1 day. And what I found out is like the meat on the outside defrosted, but the egg was still like an ice cube egg in the middle. And I cooked it that way, and it cooked up fine. It was actually perfect. So I left another one out for 2 days, and I'll cook that one and see how that was. But what I have determined is you can freeze Scotch eggs, and they cook up nicely. They bake up nicely. At least this carnivore recipe does. So that actually opens the door for me to make a bunch of Scotch eggs, both for my spring workshop and for if it's going to be a weird, hard week. And if I want to pull 6 out, so we have breakfast ready to go in the oven or dinner or whatever, it's kind of a nice thing to be able to do. So just another tool in my tool belt. So it was none of it was about dry storage this week. It was all about freezer storage for me. Next up, we have Operation Independence, where we talk about building local ongoing revenue into your life. And I have something here it's basically here for a reason. And the reason it's here is that this thing has been an albatross around my neck since last April. And so when we allow projects to come into our life that we don't finish, it's hanging around your neck like an albatross. You'll think about it from time to time. You'll see the visual clutter, and that'll throw you off your game, right? So, however, I decided last April not to do anything quickly when my car was hit. And then I ultimately was going to get that car repaired. And then it turned out the frame was bent, so I couldn't. And so I had it towed here to Parts Out to try to get some value out of things that were still worth something on the car, which I did. And now I have a car skeleton at my house. So today the car skeleton is being picked up and taken to the scrapper, and it will no longer be. And the reason that's under Operation Independence is once that space is created in my life, I can fill it with other really important things that move me forward. I don't regret getting the cash from like the motor and stuff. So that was kind of nice. But it also takes a lot of time to parts. This is what I've learned. It takes a lot of time to parts out a car because people ask you lots of questions and then don't show up a lot. And that was no fun. So the no more Tahoe. And once that's done, I can concentrate on the next vehicle that's dead in the wash right now and see what we can do about the Chevy truck that has had a persistent issue that we are hoping a transmission company can either fix so it can be sold, like responsibly sold, because I don't want to sell something that's just going to break to somebody without them knowing that it's just going to break anyway, right? It's not my truck, but it is in the way and we are not able to use it, so we might as well do something with it, right? So that's going to be the next Operation Independence. It's all about getting, you guys have heard me, I've been getting all the dead trucks out of the hauler. And once that's done, the only person left with dead trucks is Nighthawk. So he's going to be in the hot seat next. But I didn't really want us to turn into a junkyard here. So it's actually quite a relief to me to get rid of this. And I'll still have 4 tires to sell, which I'll work on then next week. So there's always something to sell. So that's what's going on as far as that goes. And it is time for me to go to the main topic of today's show about 10 minutes earlier than I get to this part of the show, which is great because today we're talking about bacteria, yeast, and the secret life of kefir. Can you tell that I used ChatGPT to generate that title? I was just messing around. I've been messing around with AI a little bit more. So I'm going to tell you what part of this show is related to AI. I used ChatGPT to help me over the last week or so identify more sources where I can get more information, like scientific sources and papers about milk kefir. And I found that to be a better tool to yield the kind of results I was looking for, which was not like non-researched blog posts that are SEO optimized, which I tend to find on kefir. I wanted research papers. I wanted to dive into what bacteria exactly are in there, what sort of health benefits it's been used for, that sort of thing. And I found it pretty useful for that. I'd made a commitment in January to start using AI a bit more so I can understand how it works. It also makes it easier for me to identify when it's being used for me, when I'm getting, targeted with AI marketing. I already knew if the word secure your spot, if that phrase is used in an ad on Facebook for an event, almost always that's related to somebody generating that text with AI. It's one of the key phrases that you see repeated over and over. Now, it's possible a person could write that as well, but I think usually those are coming from ChatGPT. Like when you see them, and you usually see those telltale green check boxes that ChatGPT likes to use too. I totally used it last week to generate the show announcement for the interview with Joshua Hale because he was talking about AI. So I was like, well, I like unedited generated it with AI just because I was like, that just fits this show. I don't usually do that, guys, but I've really been diving more deeply into like, how can I use it as a research tool? And will it get me things I used to be able to get with Google before Google messed itself up by dialing in their algorithm so much that what I find are other people's marketing at me rather than the information I would like to reach. And right now it's working for that much, but not all of the time. It's a very interesting transition we go through. So just, full disclosure, I got a lot of access to research that's behind some of the deeper parts of kefir in this from AI. And the reason I did that is I came to AI because my dog's joints hurt. So the first thing to talk about is, why does milk kefir matter? And it may not matter to you, but when my dogs have been aging and they've had joint problems. And then I was listening to Joel Riles talk about something he's found really helps with his dogs when they get older is giving them a 1/4 cup to a 1/2 cup of kefir with their dog food. So, hello, Rachel. Welcome to the live stream. So I was like, well, I got to get me some kefir going. And Eric from our network, one of the Erics, had once given me kefir grains, and I had put them in the fridge and forgotten about them until it was too late to do anything with them. And so I asked him, like, can we get some kefir grain from you? Because I'm actually ready to start making kefir. And his wife sent some down with a nice note and a little extra coffee present, which was really cool. And I started making milk kefir. And I decided if it's good for dogs' joints, I bet it's good for people's joints too, for the same reason. And so I started drinking a little bit of it's like I put it on the dog's food and then I drink a little bit and then I put it back in the fridge. That's what I do. But kefir, one of the reasons it's beneficial, or one of the reasons to think about it, is it's developing or growing bacteria that are good for your gut health, right? So for your intestinal health. And it's not just lactobacillus sort of family of bacteria, right? It's not labs. It's yeast, and there is a third type of bacteria that we will talk about that's in there. So it's a little bit beyond your typical fermented foods. And one of the things I know is when my intestines get all messed up, or when I have the stomach flu or whatever, I will start eating any ferment I can find, right? Like cheese is fermented. Sauerkraut, I'll just drink sauerkraut juice, right? I'll eat kefir. I usually get milk kefir. I usually get kvass, which is fermented beet juice, and anything else I can find. And I just mix it all up because I figure like I need a balance in me. So kefir is purported to help with gut health and digestion for that reason. And it makes sense. I mean, you can take probiotics in pill form, or you can jump into these right here. And, you know, it's sort of a more natural, I guess is a good way to say it. Because of that, when your gut is healthy, your immune system is stronger. So, they'll say, if you look at the research, it'll be like, it helps, it's naturally antibacterial and antifungal. Well, that's because it has the bacteria in there, right? And then they turn the milk naturally acidic. They turn it acidic, and acidic things are antibacterial and antifungal. That's what they are. Like, I bet you if you look up vinegar right now, it's going to become antibacterial and antifungal. It's an acid, right? It's high in calcium, magnesium, and K2, which can help support bone health. But remember, one of the best things you can do as you get into, your later years in particular, but do this in your younger years too, because you set a good foundation to keep your bones healthy, is resistance training or weightlifting. Lifting heavy things puts resistance on your bones, which triggers your body to keep your bones strong. And the more bone, like the better your bones are going into the time where your body starts depleting your bones, the better you're going to be. And I bring that up because kefir, milk kefir, is not the thing that when you're in your 80s and creaky is going to quote unquote fix your osteoporosis. You went too long, right? But you might as well make sure that you have a diet that is, giving you the nutrients you need to help with bone density. And if bone density is your concern, it's time, like, at least get resistant bands and do something, like work with somebody to figure out a routine that helps you put resistance on your bones so that you can have better bone health. And that's one of the reasons to lift weights. That's why just swimming laps, which I love to do, is not the answer to anything. Like, any one exercise isn't the answer. That's why, you hear Andy McCann talk about mixing it up or doing a variety of things. That's why CrossFit does different, like push-ups followed by rowing, followed by lifting something heavy, in all in one workout in rotation. And it's I don't know. It's something that I wish I had taken more seriously 20 years ago than I did, because I was always willing to sacrifice my workout time for getting ahead on something, on a project, on my business, on whatever. And because of that, like now that I'm taking it seriously, it's a little harder, right? It's harder to get in shape the older you get. And had I taken it seriously sooner, I would have been better off, even though I totally did CrossFit when I was 40, right? So it wasn't like I was totally ignoring it, but the consistency is more important than anything else. Now, you can buy kefir drinks at the store, but often they are not made with the kefir grain, which if you look at the bottom of this jar that I'm holding up to the camera, you'll see like it's a different color and there's some structure and shape to it at the bottom. Those are the kefir grains. And that is what makes, ooh, there's a little bubble coming out the top. That's what makes this different than sour cream, because kefir grains are basically a SCOBY. If you've ever made, what's that stuff called that you drink? Okay. Wow. We just had a brain fart. Anybody who wants to write in the comments, who's screaming it at your car right now while you're driving, you can tell me what the word is that I can't remember right now. Kombucha. There we go. So anybody who's had kombucha or made kombucha, there's this like SCOBY that floats on top of the sugar tea that you make for the SCOBY. And that is a bunch of different bacteria and also yeast that, you know, ferments the sugary tea and makes it into kombucha for you. So this is basically doing the same thing with milk, and they call it kefir grain, but it's basically a SCOBY. And the really cool thing about kefir is it comes straight from milk. You're not adding refined sugar to it. It preserves itself for as long as it will, and it has a wider range of microbes than a lot of other fermented things. So then one would ask, where did kefir come from? And the answer is no one knows. It's kind of like cheese. Cheese is similar, where, you know, if you go looking at the origins of cheese, they're like, well, it kind of popped up here or there. And we think if we're going to make up a story, this is probably how it happened. And then every so often they're doing an archaeological dig and they find an earlier instance of cheese. And if you think about it, kefir is not that different than cheese, because basically you're doing the same thing. If you leave your kefir grain for a really long time on your milk, you will get curd. It will separate completely. And that's okay. That's totally fine. But that's why kefir is a mystery. There's no like going back to, there was a dude who went for a walk and carried his milk in a stomach pouch, and then he had kefir, and he noticed if he kept the solids and put it in milk, he would maintain the same flavor every time. Also, what's fun about kefir is that kefir that comes from different regions of the Caucasus Mountains, however you say that word, like it has different bacterial makeup. And it's believed to have originated from the Caucasus Mountains, but we don't know for sure, right? There are stories about it, and it is considered by some a sacred gift from Muhammad that needed to be kept within the tribes that they were in and not shared beyond it. So for a time, you couldn't even get kefir grains anywhere else than where the kefir grains were, until somebody went and basically got some, right? But this used to be considered something that it would bring bad luck onto your tribe to let your specific kefir grains get out of there. So those are the myths about it. As people have dug into just sort of the food story of it, some people think it just evolved naturally from storing milk. And somebody figured out after storing milk and getting these chunks in it that you could use the chunks. But the really cool thing, because a lot of other fermented foods, when we take it to the laboratory, they can look at the makeup and they can be like, yeah, sure, that cheese was created by leaving it out at room temperature, and then the milk went sour, and it went so sour that you had curds and whey basically, or get separated right into solids and liquids, and then somebody figured out you could add some enzymes to it to make the curd take shape and hold, and then they figured out you could cook the curd. But we can recreate this by just taking the same bacteria that was wild caught and putting it in the milk and doing the same thing. And so then we can have a more consistent outcome rather than just wild catching the bacteria, right? Scientists have tried by taking the same bacterial makeup of kefir and taking it into the lab and putting it in the perfect environment with milk to make the solid part, which is the kefir rocks, which is a structural part of kefir, or kefir grain. I'm sorry, I call it kefir rocks. Don't ask me what. I'll just make up words sometimes because I'm a podcaster. They haven't been able to. So unlike culturing yogurt or sour cream or making anything else, they have not figured out why in some cases or sometime in history, combining the labs with the yeast, and I think it's acetobacteria. Those three things together resulted in kefir grain. So another thing about kefir is people talk about not wanting to have kefir because it's not gluten-free. I could find no research on if there was gluten in there or not, but the grains are not like grains that you grow in the field. I believe they're called grains because they kind of they're an interesting shape. They look sort of like a hunk of wheat or something, but they're translucent. You can see through them. Or they look it's almost like rice mush, but they're all different sizes. They're like a coral reef in a lot of ways, except for if a coral reef had a lot of little pieces, that's how they look. So maybe someday a lab will figure out how to make the SCOBY for milk kefir, but they just haven't yet. And that's what I think makes it kind of fun to start digging into kefir, because you have to, if you want to make it at home, you have to get the grains. In order to get the grains, somebody has to give them to you, or you need to buy them. But to have the exact environmental situation where they make themselves, nobody's figured out what that is to this day. With all the modern science we have behind us. So if you make sour cream, you end up with labs. And one of the ways I make sour cream is I just take my milk and I put it on the counter overnight, and it's sour cream the next day. And what I end up with, because I have raw milk, the top layer is sour cream, and what's below it, because the fats rise, right, when you have non-homogenized milk. And the bottom layer is clabber milk. But both of those things are basically lactobacillus, and it has acidified the milk, right? So in kefir, you have the labs, which convert the lactose in the milk, or the lactic acid, or the lactose into lactic acid, which means that your pH becomes acidic instead of basic. And then that causes the milk to thicken. So the mouthfeel of kefir is sort of like a smooth, creamy, yogurty sort of thing. But it also has yeasts, like bread has yeast. Now, what the yeast does is it finds the sugars in the milk and breaks it down into ethanol and carbon dioxide. So depending on how you make your kefir, you can also make it slightly effervescent. Yes, I'm talking about carbonated milk beverage here, guys. Mine is not, because when I make it, I use a fermentation lid that lets the CO2 out, and I don't put it through a second fermentation process to give it that effervescence. I will totally try that at some point, but what I've got going on right now is a really nice process that works with my rhythm at the homestead. And one of the most important things about from scratch living is to find ways that it works into your day-to-day life without causing you a lot of stress, so that you don't end up with a big mess, right? So you've got the labs, you got the yeast, and you got this acetobacter or bacteria, which converts ethanol. So the ethanol is made by the yeast, right? It converts ethanol into acetic acid, and that gives it a more tangy flavor, but it also means that you're not fermenting this with yeast and turning it into an alcoholic beverage that's going to make you drunk, right? There's a little bit of alcohol. There could be a little bit of alcohol in there, but it's not enough even to register. So those three things together just make a really well-balanced flavor. And it does, if you've never had it before and you've never just eaten plain yogurt, when you eat it, you'll be like, ooh, that's sour, and you may not like it. What I found, because that's kind of how I was with it, because I don't eat yogurt either. What I found was I would just take a gulp of it every day. And by the time I'd done that for a week, I was looking forward to the flavor. So it's been one of those things that people who love it, sometimes they put fruit in it to sweeten it or whatever. I actually like the tart flavor now, but it took me a little getting used to. It's kind of like I really like coffee, but I can tell you the first time I tried coffee, I didn't like coffee. But over time, I started tasting more subtleties in it as I exposed my taste buds to it. And what I've noticed is when I don't like how something tastes for the first time, I need to figure out, is it the texture or the flavor? And if it's the texture, sometimes there's nothing I can do about that. If it's the flavor, I like to give myself multiple tries of the thing. So that's, that's the bacteria that are in there, which is a more broad spectrum approach to helping your digestive system have balance than just simply, taking a pill or just eating more yogurt, right? The cool thing about it is that by fermenting it, it makes everything more digestible. So if you are lactose intolerant, sometimes you can take kefir because it's been pre-digested for you. It increases the absorption of your vitamin D, calcium, and K2, which is kind of cool. They were always there in the milk, but by fermenting it, it's more bioavailable to you. Like, think about it like this. When you have plants growing in the soil and the soil bacteria is strong, the nutrients they need, which were always there in the soil, are more available to the plant. It's like it's broken down into better pieces for them. It's because the bacteria they're like eating the nutrients, and then the plant's eating the bacteria, because plants are like bacteria hunters. Similar here, right? So those nutrients that were already in the milk are being eaten by the bacteria, consumed by the bacteria. You're consuming it. You have the live bacteria. It's more bioavailable to you. So that's kind of cool. So then obviously the next question is, how do I make kefir? And this, my friends, is something very exciting to me. So I've made kombucha, and I actually find kombucha, it's easy to make, but I also find it hard to make. And here's why I find it hard to make. Like, you'll do a gallon or two at a time, and you kind of got to watch the fermentation. And when it gets to the perfect place, you take the SCOBY out, start your new one by making sugar tea that has to cool down so you don't like burn the SCOBY. And then you add, if you want it carbonated, you add either fruit or sugar, screw the cap down, and then let it sit out for another day or two, and then put it in the fridge, and you have it. Okay. For that, I need the thing I'm fermenting in. I need the bottles I'm putting it in. I need to develop a sense of when the fermentation's at the right place for me to do the secondary fermentation. And then I have bottles of it in the fridge. And if I forget the bottles are on the counter and I'm carbonating them and they overcarbonate, they will explode. And that makes a big mess. And sometimes if you overcarbonate them and the bottles didn't explode, what'll happen when you open the lid is it will spray everywhere. Ask me how I know. That also makes a tremendous mess. So when I am doing kombucha, what I have found is I really have to pay attention a little bit more than sometimes my schedule allows me. And I know at which time of year my schedule will allow me, and I know at which time of year I'm in critical path time, and it will not allow me. And I have learned, you don't do things like, I don't make cheese when I'm on critical path because I'll forget the cheese, right? It's the same. It's the same with kombucha. Milk kefir, way easier. What you do is you get your hands on some grains. Now, the way you get grains is you can order them on Amazon. You can order them from people who produce and sell grains. You can find a friend and get some from your friend. Like a SCOBY with kombucha, once you have milk, the kefir grain grow, they like multiply over time. So I've already given away one starter kit to somebody for making milk kefir. I've got, like every about 2 to 3 weeks, I get enough to give somebody a quarter cup of kefir grain and they can start some. And hopefully, I think Ryan Steve is next up for some kefir grain for me. So we'll see if I meant to give it to him last time he was here. So I have a whole lot of kefir grain in here. And you can dry them and reconstitute them. You can put the kefir grain, if you're getting too much and don't want it in with your milk, you can put it in the fridge and that like slows its metabolism down so that they don't die. But, like any live culture, sourdough or anything else, you do need to keep it fed in the long run, right? So you can't just put it in your fridge indefinitely and expect that it's just going to live in there and you'll be able to use it anytime. But like the kefir that I brought that I am fermenting right now, I just put the grains in the bottom of the jar. So I use a mason jar and I use a quart mason jar and I pour whole milk in there and then I put it on the counter and I leave it alone until it's done. And right now the temperatures in Tennessee, it's done in 2 days. When I got my culture at first, it was not as strong and it was not as voluminous. So there were fewer grains. And it took 3 days for my first batch. And the way you know when your first batch is done is you either taste it every day just to see. You don't shake it up or anything. You just put the milk in there. You taste it to see what it tastes like. Or what I waited for was for the milk to separate like solids from liquids a little bit. And once that happened, then I knew to go on to the next step. So step 1, put the grains in the jar. Step 2, put the milk in, put a fermentation lid on, or put a coffee filter with a rubber band or something to keep bugs out just in case you have fruit flies. And then you let it go for as long as it takes. Could be 1 day, could be 2 days, could be 3 days at room temperature on your counter. When it's done, you strain it. And the way I strain it is I have one of those mesh colanders. So I pour it in that and there's a vessel under it and it starts draining through, but it doesn't drain through without help. So I take a spatula and I run it carefully along the bottom. So I'm not pushing it through because that'll push the grains through or you might ruin their structure a little bit. I scoop it and what happens is the grains don't go through the sieve and the liquid does. And when I'm done and I just have a pile of kefir grains in the colander, then I put a lid on the one that has like the kefir that's finished and I put that in the fridge and then I put the grains in the new jar and I pour more milk on it unless I don't have any milk, in which case I put it in the jar and I put the jar in the fridge until I have milk. Because I actually do a half gallon of kefir a week and I do it from raw milk. So I get the raw milk on Tuesday. Okay. And then I pour it into a mason jar from the plastic gallon jug and I put it in the fridge. And by the next morning or next afternoon, depending on when I get to it on Wednesday, I carefully ladle out the cream from the top from the rest of the milk, which still has, so this is not skim milk when you do that, guys. So you still have a decent milk fat content in there at that point. And then I pour it into my kefir jar and I put it on the counter. And then the other jar's worth of milk, I put in the fridge for my second batch of kefir. And then that takes anywhere from 1 to 3 days. I strain it and I make a second batch. This week, don't remember why, but I ended up ready to do my second batch of milk kefir on Thursday. Yeah, I think it was Thursday already. And I did not want to, and then I don't get milk till Tuesday. So I ended up pouring the milk on the grains and putting the whole thing in the fridge just so it would have a slower fermentation. So I expect this will be done tomorrow. I took it out of the fridge this morning in anticipation of the show to get it going again. And if it's not done till Wednesday, that's fine. I still have a whole quart of milk kefir from the last one. That's it. That's all it takes. So it's one of the easiest ferments to do. Now, what could possibly go wrong, right? One of the things that can go wrong is you can let it go too long and it tastes too sour. The longer you ferment that on those kefir grains, the sourer it will become because you're making lactic acid and then the acetobacter is converting ethanol into acetic acid. So both of those things are adding a sourness to the flavor, right? So that's one thing. So if you make kefir and it's too sour, make it less long. And if you want to find the perfect time, that's when you just taste it every 12 hours or so. Like add it in, take a spoon. Nope, not sour enough, or that's about sour enough. The minute it's sour enough, you're going to strain it and put it in the fridge. And then you're not completely stopping the fermentation of it, but you're slowing it down. Now, some people like it to be really thick, like yogurt, which mine with whole milk becomes that. If you're using skim milk, which this with your kefir, which you can do, you may end up with a beverage that's too thin. And if it's too thin, you'll need to use higher fat milk, or you ferment it longer, but then it's going to taste more sour, right? So it's a balance. What if it tastes like bad milk? Ew. If it tastes like bad milk, then the milk either went bad before it fermented, which means a bacteria that makes milk go off got in there, which can happen. Or, well, that's what it means. It means your milk went bad. So you either put bad milk in to begin with, or your milk went bad. And I did that once. So I had only been making kefir for about 2 weeks when I just brazenly grabbed the milk out of the fridge, poured it in there, and I got a whiff of it after it was already poured on the grains. And I was like, oh no, what do? I just put bad milk on my grains. You have not ruined the grains if you do that. That's what I learned. What I did is I then strained it right away and took the grains out. And was there a tiny amount of bad milk left on there? Yes. Not very much, though. And then I took good milk. I actually put them in the fridge for 2 days, waited for my next milk delivery, took good milk and did a batch of kefir with good milk, and it tasted fine. What I think happened, and the reason I think that worked, is that there was a tiny bit of like some off flavors on the grains left when I did that. But because the majority of the bacteria coming in from the milk I used that was good milk, plus the good bacteria in the kefir grain, those two things would have out-competed anything bad. And once you acidify the milk, the things that are bad that are going to grow won't. So the things that make milk taste like, well, rotten milk don't like an acid environment. And that's actually why we started souring milk, because then it made it digestible longer because it was acidified, which kept the bad bacteria from growing, right? So that's also part of the process. So, and then if you're going to be out of town, be really careful when you grab milk out of your fridge that it isn't milk that's been there for 2 weeks, because you should have thrown the milk away before you left town, but you didn't. Ask me how I know, right? So that's about all that can go wrong with kefir, unless you just leave it around. Like if I just left my kefir on the counter for too long, it could start molding. Like it's possible mold could come. And then if mold came, once there's mold on the top, there's mold in the whole thing. I don't know if that ruins the grains or not. That's actually something I should have thought to learn. I haven't learned more about that part, because there's not a lot of papers on what do you do with moldy kefir. That tells me it doesn't mold very often. My guess for that would be because it's acidified, right? You know, sure, you leave things around long enough, something's going to happen to make it decompose. But there they are. So then we come to the most important part of kefir. How do you use it? Because the way I'm using it right now is I just drink it straight from the jar. A lot of people make delicious beverages out of it, and they use it as a base for a smoothie. They'll add fruit in there, honey, spices. They might even try to sneak some kale by you, right? But it makes a delicious addition to fruit smoothies and other things of that nature. And that's the kefir you'll see at the store most often, is it's already made into a smoothie-like thing. But if you think about what kefir is, it's a sour flavored sort of yogurt textured, but a little runnier than yogurt, it's yogurt textured unless you're thinking Greek yogurt. That's what it is. And what would that be good in? And you put your thinking cap on and you say, self, what would I use yogurt in? You know what I thought of first? Salad dressing. So salad dressing is another way to use it. If you want to make a creamy sort of like what I would do. So, you know, as much as ranch dressing gets a bad rap, it's basically a lot of garlic, salt, pepper, and spices like basil and oregano fit in there really well. And you'll end up with this combination. And then you put it with sour cream. So you end up with a combination of tart or not tart. If you don't have sour cream, you can do lemon and milk. But that's basically how you make ranch dressing. Just use kefir. Kefir is the base for that. I do a lot of salad dressings that have either sour cream or heavy cream in them because I like a creamy dressing. I use mayonnaise as well. So any salad dressing that would use mayonnaise, you can use sour cream with, and it adds a little bit more tart. But mayonnaise is kind of tart too if you have a real mayonnaise that you made from scratch. So that's another way, or dips, right? So if you're doing a cream cheese dip, you can thin it out a little bit with the kefir or tzatziki sauce. That's another one. What about kefir cheese? Like, imagine taking the kefir and letting it go long enough that it really separates well into solids and liquids, and then straining that through a cloth, adding some garlic and some rosemary to it and stirring that up, and you'd have a nice soft farmer's cheese, like a spreadable cheese. That's a great way to do it. I wonder if it would melt. Like, that's the other thing. Is like, what if I heat that after I do that? I don't know. I haven't tried that experiment yet. You can also, after you make it, so I've talked to you about how to take it through first fermentation, right? And then you put it in the fridge and drink it. The other thing you can do is take that, strain it, add like a tablespoon of crushed up fruit or a little bit of sugar, put it in like a soda bottle or something with a lid that will keep the CO2 from escaping, put it on the counter for 12 to 24 hours, and make it a carbonated beverage. Pretty interesting, huh? Of course, I recommend not doing that with a mason jar, because you can put the lid down and get carbonation on a mason jar, but they're not designed to not explode if the carbonation gets too tight. So I would really look for something more like a soda bottle or one of those like hatch down lid things that you use for kombucha, that sort of thing. But the yeast is still there and it's still making CO2 and alcohol, and that will absolutely carbonate your milky beverage, you know, and think about that. Like, you could add ginger, right? And boost the carbonation, and it'd be like a ginger, creamy, interesting. Anybody who's had an Italian soda knows what I'm talking about. Like, a creamy carbonated thing sounds pretty good. In fact, I might want to do that with skim milk so it wasn't as thick. I don't know. So that's another thing you can do with cooking with it. Anything that would take sour cream, like stroganoff, for example, you could try it with kefir. I was actually making a sauce to go over my steaks the other day, and I threw kefir in because I was like, well, I got kefir. Let's try it with kefir. Instead of adding cream to a broth for a stew, you can add kefir. So there's a lot of different ways you can use it. I'd love to hear your ways as well. But it's a whole new tool in my toolkit now that I'm doing it. And it's so easy to make, because it's literally like, it's almost as easy as making sprouts for your salads, right? Where you just sort of drain it every day and put it by the sink or put it up in your cabinet where the light won't get it. It's like, okay, I poured the milk in the thing and I put it on my counter for 2 days, and it looks like it's done. Because once you've done it a few times, you know what it looks like when it's done. Like, this one's not done yet, but it's almost done. I can already see that it's starting to separate the solids from the liquids. And okay, so I'm having coffee and I'm waiting for my coffee, which takes a minute and a half to make itself in my magical coffee machine. And during that minute and a half, I take a pot down, I put the strainer on, I pour it in, and I start straining it. And sometimes the coffee's done before I am, but usually I'm done before the coffee is. Then I get my coffee and I have the grains and I have the liquids, and while I'm drinking my coffee, I pour the milk in the new thing and I put the other one in the fridge. And that's how long it takes. It's less than 5 minutes twice a week for me. And it's just a whole new flavor toolkit for everything I'm doing. And the one thing I do wonder, because my next door neighbor is allergic to dairy, is if the combination of the 3 bacteria in there that are transforming the milk have changed it enough that he can have some. So we may actually try to see what he can do. The Rormans say, we love it with lemon juice and honey, add milk and water to thin, and drink. The children go wild over it. Yeah. So that's, a fun beverage you can do. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's show all about kefir. The reason I started drinking it was for joint health and gut health, and I'm enjoying it. I think it is making a difference. I have also started taking liver pills, which, just like pills that are freeze-dried liver, and that's made a big difference for me too. So really just changing my relationship with food has and getting more variety, I think, has been really helpful for a lot of different reasons, but also dog joints. Don't forget the dog joints. And having that flavor tool in your proof profile, like in your toolbox in your kitchen, is always a fun thing as well, especially as we get into, it's about to be vegetable season, and I might actually want more salad dressings than I've had lately. Anyway, if you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in two ways. One, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. Two, consider becoming a member. Our next member webinar is going to be how to get started with small events on your homestead. I'll be doing that presentation later this month. Check it out at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, guys, go out and make it a great week.